The card with her name upon it had been moved twice before the soup came in. Damaris Fenn saw it move the second time. She was standing where paid women stand at such dinners, just inside the door of the long room at Marlbrook, in the narrow country between the servants and the guests, waiting to be told where she might sit. She had a good view of the table from there. She had a good view of Miss Amabel Trant leaning across the back of a chair with a place card between two fingers, laughing behind her hand, and of the three young people leaning in to hear her. There was one seat at that table nobody wanted. It was not a poor seat. It was near the head, on the left, with the fire behind it and the good silver in front of it, and it had been empty at every dinner given in that house for the better part of 3 years. The reason for it sat beside it and did not appear to notice. The Duke of Blackwood had come at 7 and had spoken, so far as Damaris had observed, 11 words. He was a long, black-coated, still man of perhaps 34, with a hard mouth and a face that had been handsome before something went out of it. He sat with his wine untouched. On either side of him the cloth ran on white and bare, 2 clean places laid and no one in them, so that he seemed to be dining alone in the middle of 30 people, which Damaris thought was very likely the arrangement he preferred. The whisper had gone round before dinner, and she had heard all of it, because a woman who has trained herself to be furniture hears a great deal that louder people miss. 9 men dead in the Blackwood workings. A jury that had not quite said the word, a duke who had shut his gates for 2 winters, and had come tonight only because Sir Odo Trant had begged it of him. A shilling, Miss Trant had said, that no woman here would take the chair beside him. A shilling, said one of the young men, that if she did, she would not get 3 words out of him. And then somebody had remembered that Lady Sidonie Revell had brought a companion, and that a companion was neither served nor serving, and could be put anywhere at all, and would have to go where she was put. So the card was moved a second time, and a footman came to the door and told Damaris quietly that she was to sit at the head on the left. She understood the whole of it in the 2 seconds it took to cross the room, and it did not trouble her. She had learned young that the safest place in any gathering is directly underneath its contempt, because nobody troubles to look closely at a thing they have already finished thinking about. She sat down. She put her hands in her lap with her father's ivory memorandum, leaves in her pocket, where they always were. She said good evening to the Duke of Blackwood, and he turned his head perhaps an inch, and did not answer, and the table went on talking. It went on for 2 courses. Damaris ate very little, and watched the room the way she watched everything, carefully and without appearing to. Sir Odo was frightened of his own guest. The young man opposite, a pink and handsome creature called Peveril Nash, had been at the claret for hours and was working himself up to something the way a dog works itself up to a gate, and the Duke's hand, resting on the cloth beside his glass, was perfectly still, and a man is only that still when he is holding something down. Mr. Nash got to his gate at the Fish. He said it loudly, into one of those pockets of quiet that open in a room without warning, so that the whole table heard it, and no one afterwards could pretend they had not. He said that he had been meaning to ask His Grace, as one who took an interest, how many it had been in the end at the Blackwood workings, because the county said 9 and the newspaper had said 11, and a man liked to have his figures right. The room went out like a lamp. Damaris felt rather than saw the change beside her. There was no movement in it at all. The Duke of Blackwood set down nothing, took up nothing, and turned no head. He simply said, in a voice that was not raised in any degree whatsoever, and which reached every corner of that room as though it had been carried there, that Mr. Nash was to be taken out. 2 footmen came off the wall behind him. No, said Damaris Fenn. The word was out of her before she had made any decision about it. She heard it in the air with a kind of distant astonishment, the way you hear a glass go over at the other end of a table. Both footmen stopped because she had not sounded like a companion, and because people who are quite certain are obeyed for a moment by everybody whatever they happened to be wearing. She did not look at the Duke. She had learned long ago that a room full of people is only a large and stupid animal. You make yourself small and dull. You give it nothing to be afraid of. You go on with what you were doing until it forgets it was going to bolt. So she picked up her fork and looked at her fish and spoke to Mr. Nash pleasantly, as though he had asked her the time. She said that she did not know the newspaper's figure, but that the newspaper had also given the workings 4 ventilation doors, and there were 7, and that a man who had got the doors wrong could not be relied upon for anything else in the column. She said it was 9. She said their names had been read at the inquest, and she supposed the least a person could do was keep the number straight afterwards. Then she asked Mr. Nash whether he had ever been down a shaft. He said, thrown entirely off his stride, that he had not. She said that she had not either, but that she had once known a man who had, and that he told her the worst of it was not the dark, and was not the water. It was the timbering working above you all day, where you could hear it and could not see it. And she asked whether Mr. Nash would be so kind as to pass the sauce. He passed the sauce. The table breathed. Zerotto said something loud and grateful about the weather in a voice like a man throwing a blanket over a fire, and the noise came up again all around them. And it was over, and it had taken perhaps 40 seconds, and Damaris Fenn had not raised her voice once. She was eating her fish, which she did not want, when the Duke of Blackwood turned in his chair, not his head. His chair. He turned the whole of himself toward her, deliberately, in front of 30 people, and looked at her for the first time that evening. His eyes were a pale and difficult gray. "You said 7 doors," he said. "There are 7, Your Grace." "There were 7, he said. "There are none. I stopped the water, and I stopped the workings, and there is nothing down there now at all." He was quiet a moment. "Nobody in this county has said that number aloud to my face in 2 years. They say it behind me. They have never once got it right. It is 9, Damaris said. "Yes," said the Duke of Blackwood. "It is 9. At the other end of the table, Miss Amabel Trant said behind her hand that they need not congratulate the creature, for his grace was only being cruel slowly, and the little companion would be crying into her gloves before the sweet ponicle. Mr. Oram, who stood against the wall by the door where good servants stand, heard her say it, and said nothing, being a man of 60, who had said nothing professionally for 40 years. But he thought, watching those black shoulders angled away from the whole room and toward one small brown woman in a made-over gown, that in 19 years of service he had never once seen his master turn his chair for anybody living. He put the thought away where he kept such things, and went to see about the suite. Damaris Fenn had come south to be nobody, and she had been at it for 2 years and 4 months, and there was nothing else she did half so well. She had told Lady Sidonie Revell the truth in her letters, and had left out the shape of it, which is a different sin from lying, and sits differently in the chest. She had said that she was a clerk's daughter from the north, motherless, without family, obliged to keep herself. All of that was true. She had not said what her father had clerked at, or what she had clerked at after him, which was the office of a colliery at Harrogate Bank, where a girl with a neat hand and a head for figures had copied the ventilation book fair every quarter for 2.5 years. She had not said that she had copied it fair for the last time in the March before the fall, knowing, as she wrote it, that the fair copy was not true. She had been 20 pyre. The underviewer stood at her elbow and told her, kindly enough, that the figures wanted tidying, and that a girl who made trouble in an office had nowhere to go afterwards, and she had believed him about the second thing because it was perfectly correct. So she wrote what she was given, and in the autumn the roof came in at the deep end, and 4 men were carried out, and at the inquest the fair book was produced, and the underviewer wept, and the blame settled on a deputy named Tobin Ferris, who had shored that end himself, and who could not read, and who got 5 years for it. Damaris had sat at the back of that room in her gray cloak, and had not stood up. She had gone over it perhaps 10,000 times since, and it always came out the same. She had been 20 and frightened, and she had said nothing, and Tobin Ferris had 2 years and more still to serve in New South Wales. There was a paper in the strongbox of an attorney named Ephraim Tull with her signature at the foot of it, certifying the fair copy true. Mr. Tull had kept it as a man keeps a dog he does not much like, against the day it should prove useful. So long as Damaris Fenn was nobody, that paper was nothing. The day anyone in England thought her worth naming, it was 7 years' transportation, and she knew the wording of the statute by heart. She had one plan, and it was not a large one. She had put aside £11 in 2 years. When Tobin Ferris came home, she meant to have 100, and to have it reach him from no name at all, and then to go on being no name until she died. 3 years. She had only to remain unnoticed for 3 years. She had never in her life been so noticed as she was at that table, and she knew it, and she sat with her hands in her lap and her heart going like a bird under a cloth, and she thought, with the small, cold clarity that had kept her alive so far, that she had just made the most expensive mistake of her life over a plate of fish in front of 30 people. For the sake of a man she had never spoken to, they went to Blackwood 11 days later, and it was Lady Sidney Ravel's own doing, and she did not ask anybody's leave. The house stood at the head of a wooded valley, with the river on one side of it and the workings on the other, and it was the first thing Damaris had ever seen that was in perfect order, and quite dead. Nothing had gone to ruin. That was the strangeness of it. The stone was sound, the gravel raked, the windows whole. But the shutters were folded across 2/3 of the rooms and had not been opened for 2 winters, and the furniture under its covers stood about in the dark like a congregation, and every clock in the house had been stopped. She counted 9 of them in the first hour, and all of them were stopped at different hours, which told her they had not been stopped on purpose in the manner of a death in the family. They had simply been let run down, one after another over months, by a household that had given up winding things. The village was worse, and the village was the part that mattered. Blackwood town was a colliery town with no colliery. The engine house on the bank had its chimney and its wheel, and no smoke and no sound, and the yard below was stacked with good timber going gray in the weather. There were men on the street corners at 10 in the morning, and men on them still at 4, standing in that particular way men stand when they have been standing a long time and have got the trick of it. The schoolroom by the chapel was shut. The pay office by the gate was not. Damaris walked down through it on the second morning behind Lady Sidney, who leaned on her arm and could not see it, and who, therefore, asked to be told, and was told the truth, because she had asked for it in a way that made anything else impossible. "There is a shop," Damaris said. "It has the estate arms over the door." "That will be senate's," said Lady Sidney, "and the widows go to it." "They do, ma'am. They are going into it now, but they are not paying at the counter. They are handing over a paper first, and the paper is being written on and handed back." Lady Sidney Ravel stopped in the middle of the road. "Say that again," she said, slowly, "and do not soften it." So Damaris said it again, and added the rest of what she had seen in 2 days, which was not a great deal and was quite enough. That the relief came not in coin but as a ticket, and the ticket was good at one shop, and the shop was Senate's, and Senate's flour was a penny-halfpenny over the price at Marbrook Market. That a woman paid in tickets cannot go elsewhere, and cannot save and cannot be shown to have been robbed, because every figure in the book is perfectly correct. She said that she supposed the arrangement was nobody's, and that things of that kind are generally nobody's, which is exactly why they go on for years. And she said the last thing last, because it was the thing that had kept her awake. "In 2 days," she said, "I have not heard one person in this village say the Duke's name unkindly. Not one. They say his Grace is a good man that lost his brother. They say it the way you would say a man is ill. And then they say that Mr. Rusk has the running of everything, and they say that quite differently." "Who," said Lady Sidney Ravel, "told you that a girl of your age could see all that in 2 days?" "Nobody, ma'am," said Damaris. "No, I was a clerk. The story of the Duke of Blackwood came out that evening in the small East Room, which was the one room in that house with a fire in it, and Lady Sidonie told it flatly, sitting very upright, with her sightless eyes turned toward the sound of the coals. There had been 2 brothers, Alaric, who had the title, and Emlyn, who had been younger by 6 years, who had married a handsome, anxious woman named Adeline, and got a son by her, and had run the Blackwood workings because Alaric was 3 years in the north on the family's other business. Emlyn had been a charming man and not a careful one. Emlyn had listened to his agent about economies. And on a wet morning in the March of 2 years past, the deep end of the Blackwood workings had come in. 9 men. Jash, Emlyn Hesketh, was the 9th, and he was down there because he had gone down himself when the first men did not come up, which was the single bravest and most useless thing he ever did in his life. Alaric came home to bury his brother and to sit through the inquest, and at the inquest the ventilation book was produced fair and complete, and in a good clerkly hand, and the book said the doors had been kept, and the timbering renewed, and since the book said so, and since the book could not be argued with, the coroner's men were driven back on the only remaining explanation, which was that the men had been careless, and being unable to say that of 9 dead men in front of their widows, they said nothing at all in a great many words. The county decided the Duke of Blackwood had known. He had not known. He had been 300 miles away, but he had signed the accounts that paid for the economies, without reading them, for 3 years, from an office in another county, because his brother had asked him to, and because it was easier than going home. He has never once said in public that he did not know. Lady Sidonie said, "Do you understand why?" Damaris understood exactly why, and it went through her like cold water, because to say it, she said, he would have to say that his brother did know. "Yes," said Lady Sidonie Ravel, "so he says nothing, and shuts his gates, and lets them think it, and has done for 2 years. He is not a cold man, whatever they have told you. He is a man standing in a burning room holding the door shut from the inside so that nobody looks in and sees his brother in there. It is the most expensive kindness I have ever watched anybody perform." She put out one hand and found Damaris's wrist and closed on it, and her grip was a great deal stronger than it had any business being. "Now," she said, "I am going blind, and I am not going to be gracious about it. I have 400 a year of my own, and a godson who will not look at his own valley. And I have brought you here to be my eyes, and I mean to use you. You will walk with me, and you will carry the relief baskets to the 9 houses yourself every week, and you will come back and tell me what is in those kitchens, and you will not be tactful, because I have not the time left to be lied to kindly." "Your ladyship," Damaris said, "I am a companion." "You are a clerk," said Lady Sidonie. "You told me so yourself this morning, and you had no idea what you were admitting." She let go of the wrist. "One more thing, and then we shall have the tea. I sent a young woman here last spring to do exactly what I have just asked of you. She was a sensible creature. She lasted 3 weeks, and she came back to me white as a dish and asked to be released, and she would not tell me why, and she has not answered a letter since." Damaris said nothing. "I am telling you," said Lady Sidonie Ravel, "because I dislike being the sort of old woman who sends girls into things without telling them. Go up now. You will want to think about it, and you will do it anyway, because you have the face of a person who has already decided and does not know it yet. The house knew about the dare before Damaris had been at Blackwood a week. She had expected that. Servants' news runs downhill faster than water, and Malbrook was only 9 miles off, and a laid table with a joke on it is far too good a story to keep. By the Sunday, it had a wager attached to it, which is what always happens to a story in a large house, and the wager was that the little companion would be gone by quarter day. The odds were not kind. Mrs. Quillen, the cook, who liked her, put 6 pence on the quarter day out of pure realism, and told her so to her face, which Damaris thought was the most honest thing anybody had done for her in a year. She did not mind the wager. She thought it a perfectly sound bet. She had made a version of it herself on the road south with everything she owned in one box. But she noticed the shape of it, and the shape was this. At Malbrook, they had wagered $1 on whether she could get 3 words out of a man. At Blackwood, they wagered 6 on how soon she would run. 2 houses, 2 coins, and in both of them, she was the thing being bet on, and not the person doing the betting. And she had spent 2 years and 4 months making sure that was exactly how it went, because a woman nobody bets on is a woman nobody looks up in a register. She did not mean to win it by argument. She had never won anything by argument in her life. Arguing requires you to be somebody first. She meant to win it the only way she trusted, which was to make herself so quietly necessary that one morning the house would look round and find it could not remember how it had managed before, and the wager would not be lost so much as forgotten, because the question it asked would have stopped meaning anything. So she began, and she began small, and she began with the things nobody else would touch. She wound the clocks, all 9 of them, over 3 days, standing on chairs with the keys she had asked Mr. Oram for. And when the long case on the stairs began again, it was so loud in that silent house that a housemaid came out onto the landing to see what had broken. Nobody had asked her to. Nobody told her to stop. By the end of the week, the hall at Blackwood had a sound in it, and people had begun, without noticing, to walk at the pace of it. She had the shutters folded back in the east passage, and then in the morning room, because a woman carrying a basket needs the light, which was true, and because a shut house teaches everybody in it to keep their voices down, which was truer. And she began to carry the baskets. There were 9 houses. She went to all 9 in the first fortnight, and she went in the same way every time, which was to say very little, and to stay half an hour, and to take nothing back with her but what she had been told. In the 4th cottage, a woman named Hesper Cobb, who had 2 children and a 3rd coming, and a husband under the Blackwood Bank, said the thing that changed everything, and said it while wiping a table and not looking up. She said it was kind of her ladyship to send, and that they did very well, and that she only wished sometimes that somebody from the house would say Jem's name, because they said the 9. She said. Everybody said the 9. And a number was not a person, and she had begun to be afraid that in 10 years there would be nothing left of her husband anywhere at all except a figure in a sentence. Damaris walked back up to the house and did not go in. She went along the wall to the estate church instead, and found the sexton, and asked for the burial register, and sat down in the cold with her father's ivory memorandum leaves on her knee, and copied out all 9 names in her clerk's hand, with their ages, and the dates, and the townships they came from. She was still at it when the light went, and she did not hear the church door. Alaric Hesketh, Duke of Blackwood, stood at the end of the pew and looked at what she was writing for a long moment before she knew he was there. "You are copying my brother's name," he said. "I am copying all of them, Your Grace." "Why?" "Because Hesper Cobb is afraid her husband is going to turn into a number," Damaris said. She did not stand up and she did not apologize, and afterward she could never account for either. And I am afraid she is right, and I find I cannot bear it. It is my besetting fault. I would put a ledger in order at the bottom of the sea. The Duke of Blackwood was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Jem Cobb was 31. He had a bad shoulder from a fall in the 18. He could sing. And he sat down at the other end of the pew, in the dark, in his own church, and told a clerk's daughter he had met twice the names of the other 8, from memory, without once getting one wrong. Mrs. Ottilien Frayne had the West Rooms at Blackwood and had had them for 2 years, and she came down to dinner on the day Damaris wound the last of the clocks and looked at the hall as though somebody had moved a wall. She was a tall, handsome, tired woman of 32, with a boy of 6 called Nye, who was the nearest thing to an heir that house possessed, and she wore her widowhood the way some women wear a coat they cannot afford to replace. She was perfectly civil. She was civil the way a bank is civil. "You have been busy," she said over the soup, My brother-in-law's godmother is fortunate in her companion. Her ladyship is very good to me, ma'am. And you were in the north before, Miss Fenn. Lady Sidney said so. I was, ma'am. Whereabouts in the north? Said Mrs. Frayne. It is a large country. My husband had business at Durham and at Newcastle, and at a place called Harrogate Bank, and I always think one knows somebody who knows somebody if one only goes on asking. The spoon did not stop on the way to Damaris Fenn's mouth. She had had a great deal of practice, and she was better at this than at anything else on earth. Nowhere so far up as that, she said. My father clerked at a woolen agent's in the West Riding, and there is nothing whatever to say about it. How dull for you, said Adeline Frayne, and turned to her son and did not ask again. But she had asked once, and she had named the place, and Damaris lay awake a long time that night, doing sums about how many places there are in England and how few of them anybody names by accident. The trouble began as it always began with her. In a column, she had been carrying the basket 6 weeks by then, and because she was what she had begun keeping a plain tally of it, not an official book, a private one on the ivory leaves, and then copied into a stitched paper book she kept in her box. What went into each of the 9 houses each week, and what she was told at each door about what else had come, and from whom, and in what form. She did it out of habit rather than suspicion, the way a joiner runs a hand along a rail without deciding to. The relief account was posted every quarter on the board outside the pay office because Mr. Rusk was a great believer in the forms of things. Damaris read it on a Tuesday in the rain the way she read everything, which was slowly and twice the relief fund. Of the Blackwood workings paid to each of the 9 widowed families the sum of 8 shillings weekly. She stood in the rain and did the arithmetic she had been doing for 6 weeks without knowing it, against Sennett's own prices chalked in his window, not 8 yards from where she stood. 8 shillings in tickets bought 5 and 3 pence of what 8 shillings in coin bought at Marlbrook Market. 2 and 9 pence a week, 9 houses. It came to something over £60 a year, going quietly out of a fund raised for dead men's children and into a shop with the estate arms over the door, and every figure in the posted account was perfectly correct. That was the thing she could not get past. Nobody had falsified anything. The fund paid 8 shillings. The account said 8 shillings. The theft was not in the book at all. It was in the arrangement, and an arrangement cannot be prosecuted. She wiped the ivory leaves clean with her thumb, which is what ivory leaves are for, and said nothing to anybody. She had one rule that had kept her alive, and the rule was that you do not open your mouth until you can prove the whole of it, because a half-proof is worse than silence. It gets tidied away, and the man doing the tidying learns exactly where you are standing. So she went looking for the rest of it. The chance came in the 3rd week of May, when Mr. Rusk went to the Marlbrook quarter sessions, as he did 4 times a year, and the pay office door stood open because a boy was in there sweeping. The inner room was Rusk's, and it was not locked that afternoon, because a man does not lock an inner door against his own sweeping boy. Damaris told herself she had come about the schoolroom roof, which was true, and had the paper in her hand to prove it, which was truer, and stood in that doorway for the space of 4 breaths, understanding perfectly well that she was about to do the thing she had promised herself she would never do again. Then she went in. There were no 2 books standing side by side, waiting to be found. That is a fool's idea of how these things are done. There was one book, the Timber and Stores book of the Blackwood workings, and it was perfectly in order, and it was the wrong shape. She saw it in under a minute, because it was the only thing on earth she was truly good at. In the 3 years before the fall, the workings had bought timber. A great deal of timber, entered quarterly at good prices from a merchant at Marlbrook named Hoyle. Props, bars, lids, and door frames, all of it charged to the deep end where the new ventilation doors were going in. And in the same 3 years the workings had sold timber. Not much, a little every quarter, entered small, as waste and old prop wood, cleared off the bank, sold back to the same Mr. Hoyle at a waste price. There was nothing wrong with either column. Collieries buy timber and clear old wood off a bank, and any man might look at that book for a year and see a well-kept account. But Damaris Fenn had spent 2.5 years copying exactly this kind of book, and she knew a thing about it that a duke would not know, and a magistrate would not know. Old prop wood does not come off a bank in the same quarter. It goes down the shaft. It comes off a bank 3 years later, black and crushed and fit for nothing but firing. And the quantities in the waste column tracked the quantities in the buying column quarter for quarter, at a lag of about 6 weeks, all the way down 3 years of that page, which meant that the good new timber charged to the deep end had gone down the shaft on paper and out of the yard by cart, and had come back to Mr. Hoyle as waste at a waste price. And the difference had gone somewhere, and the deep end had never had a new doorframe in it at all. She stood in that little room with the rain on the window and understood that she was not looking at a fund being skimmed. She was looking at why 9 men were dead. The relief tickets were nothing. The tickets were a man helping himself to the change out of a coat he had already emptied. This was the coat. 3 years of selling the roof out over the heads of the men who worked under it, written down fair as he went, in good ink, in a book that would satisfy anybody who had not sat where she had sat. And when the roof came in, the ventilation book had been produced at the inquest, fair and complete, in a good clerkly hand. Damaris did not touch it. She did not copy a figure out of it. She stood and read and put her hands behind her back like a child in a shop, because if one page of that book were ever found disturbed, she was a young woman with no family in a house 9 miles from anywhere, and the last young woman who went looking had come away white and would not say why. She was at the window with the school roof paper in her hand and her back to the desk when the outer door went and a boy's broom stopped, and a man's voice in the pay office said, quite pleasantly, that he had come back early because the sessions had risen at noon. We shall take a short break here. If you are enjoying the story, please subscribe to the channel so that you do not miss the next one. Mr. Corbin Rusk was a long gray man of about 45 who did not smile. That was the first thing Damaris had noticed about him, and it was the thing she came back to afterwards lying awake. She had been threatened before in her life, twice, and both times by men who smiled all the way through it. Rusk did not. Rusk was grave and quiet and beautifully polite, and he had the manner of a good family solicitor delivering bad news, and it was very much worse. He came into the inner room with his hat still on and took it off when he saw her. Miss Fenn. Mr. Rusk, I came about the schoolroom roof. Her ladyship has asked me to get a figure for it. In here, said Mr. Rusk. The boy said I might wait. He looked at her for a moment. He did not look at the desk, which she noted because a man who is worried about his desk looks at his desk, and a man who is truly dangerous has trained himself not to. Then he said, "Sit down a moment, Miss Fenn," and he sat down himself, on the edge of the desk, with his hat in his hands, and he talked to her for 4 minutes in the kindest voice she had ever been frightened by. He said the baskets were a great kindness, and that he hoped she would not think him presuming if he offered a word about the village. It was a hard place. The men had been idle 2 years, and idleness sours people. A young lady, walking down there alone with a book and a pencil, asking what came into a kitchen and what did not, was very likely to be misunderstood by people who could not read the pencil and would invent what it said. He said that her ladyship was in her 70s and would not be at Blackwood forever, and that when she went, a companion goes with her, and a companion who has made a talking point of herself does not find the next place easily. And he said, at the end, in the same even and regretful voice, that there had been a young woman at Blackwood the spring before who had also carried the baskets, and who had also asked a great many questions, and who had left rather suddenly, and that he had always been sorry about it because she had been a good sort of girl. And it was a pity she had let the place get on her nerves. He put his hat back on. He had never once raised his voice, and had not said a single thing that could be repeated to a magistrate, and Damaris Fenn understood two things at the same moment. The first was that she was in genuine danger, of a kind she had not been in since Harrogate. The second was better and worse. She had watched his hands the whole 4 minutes, and his hands had turned that hat round 3 complete times. He was afraid of her. He had built 3 years of quiet work on there being nobody in Blackwood who could read a timber column, and now he was not sure, and not being sure was intolerable to him, and he had come in to find out. She said that she was very much obliged for the advice. She went out past him with the school roof paper in her hand, and she got up the hill and into the house and up 2 flights before her legs went, and then she did the thing she was most ashamed of afterwards. She stopped. For 11 days she carried the baskets and read to Lady Sidney and wound the clocks and said nothing to anybody at all. She told herself it was tactics, and some of it was, but she knew the other part of it, and she made herself look at the other part in the dark, because she had promised herself once that whatever else she became, she would not be a person who lied to herself about her own reasons. To speak was to be seen. To be seen was to be asked, "Who are you, and whose daughter, and where did a companion learn to read a colliery book like that?" And behind that question, in a strong box in the north, was a sheet of paper with her name at the foot of it, and a sentence written on it in law that she knew by heart. She had 4 men on her already. She could not have 9 more. So she was quiet, and she was quiet for 11 days, and on the 12th day, Hesper Cobb's youngest took the croup. It was nothing much. It is nothing much, 100,000 times a year in England. The child wanted a warm room, which meant coal, and a doctor from Marbrook, which meant 3 shillings and 6pence in coin. Hesper Cobb had 8 shillings a week, and no coin at all, because her 8 shillings was a ticket, and Senates did not stock coal in May, and did not give change. Damaris came down with the basket on the Thursday, and found the door open and the child on the settle breathing hard and rough, and Hesper folding and refolding a piece of paper worth 8 shillings, in a shop that could not sell her the one thing she needed. She was not crying. That was the part Damaris could not afterwards get out of her head. She was apologizing for the state of the room and for having no tea to offer, and she said that they did very well, and that his Grace was a good man that lost his brother, and that she did not like to trouble the house about it, not with all that they had to bear up there. Damaris put 3 shillings and 6pence of her own £11 on the table, and went out and stood in the lane, and she saw the whole machine at last, all of it at once, standing in the mud with her empty basket. Rusk had not needed to be clever. He had only needed to be patient, and to build on other people's goodness, on a duke who would not look at his own valley, because looking meant seeing his brother in it, on widows too loyal to complain about the house that had buried their husbands, on a boy sweeping an office, on a magistrate who could not read a timber column, on a girl who had been told once, at 20, exactly what it cost to speak, and had believed it ever since. Everybody in it was being good. That was the mechanism. A valley full of decent, frightened people was being quietly eaten, and it would go on being eaten until one of them was willing to be seen. She had been that person once before, and she had stayed in her seat, and 4 men had gone into the ground, and 1 had gone to New South Wales. Damaris Fenn walked back up the hill and made up her mind, and she made it up in the exact terms of the only trade she had. She could not go to the Duke with a suspicion. She had watched what a fair book does to a suspicion in a coroner's court from the back row, with her hands in her lap. A suspicion. Rusk would answer in 4 courteous minutes, and she would be on the London road by Friday with no character. She needed the thing itself. She needed the timber, from the outside, from men who had no reason to lie, in figures that could be laid beside the estate's own posted account, so that the difference stood up off the page and could not be talked away. And she was going to have to build it in daylight, under his eye, as the woman who carried the baskets, because there was nowhere else to stand. She built it from the outside in, which is the only way a person with no authority ever builds anything. She began with Mr. Hoyle at Malbrook, and she went to him openly, on the carrier's cart, with a perfectly true errand about deal boards for the schoolroom roof. Mr. Hoyle was a stout, cheerful timber merchant with no more idea of what he was sitting on than a hen has of an egg, and he was delighted to talk, and when a quiet young person asked whether he had ever done work for the Blackwood workings, he brought out his day-book with the pride of a man showing off a garden. Damaris copied every line of it over 3 visits, on the ivory leaves in the cart and into the stitched book at night, what he had sold to Blackwood, and when, and what he had bought back off the bank as waste, and when, and at what price. He signed a plain statement of the whole at the 3rd visit, and thought it was about the deal boards. She got Senate's posted prices and Malbrook market prices for the same week, and the difference between a ticket and a coin over 11 weeks in her own hand. She got the 9 widows to make their marks to what they had truly received, which took her a month, because they did not want to make trouble for the house. She got it in the end by asking a different question. She did not ask them to accuse anybody. She asked what their husbands were owed, and every one of the 9 signed that. And she went twice to the stopped engine house on the bank at dusk, and paced out the yard, and counted what timber was actually stacked in it, and what state it was in, because Mr. Hoyle's waste column and the bank's own wood pile did not agree either, and that discrepancy was worth more than all the rest, being visible to any man with eyes. She worked at night. She kept the stitched book under the lining of the ivory leaf case, which was flat and hard, and had been her father's, and which nobody in that house would have looked at twice. Twice he came near it. Once Rusk stopped her on the road to Marlbrook and asked gravely and pleasantly whether the carrier's cart was not a great expense for a companion, and she said that the schoolroom roof would not measure itself, and he looked at her a long moment and let her go by. Once she came back from the bank at dusk and found him standing in the lane below the engine house with a lantern, not going anywhere, and she said good evening, and walked past him, and it took her 400 yards to stop hearing her own heart. And all that while, in the evenings, she and the Duke of Blackwood came to know one another, and neither of them ever once said a word about arranging it. He walked on the bank every evening at dusk. Everybody in the house knew it, and nobody spoke of it, the way a household builds itself carefully around a thing it does not understand. He went up past the engine house and stood where he could see the whole valley going dark, and came down when it was dark, and had done it every night for 2 years. She met him there the first time by accident, coming down from her pacing with her heart still going. She apologized and turned to go, and he said, "Stay, if you like. There is a great deal of it." So she stayed, and they looked at the valley, and said almost nothing, and after that she came most evenings, and he was most evenings there. He was not what the county said, and he was not what she had first thought, either. Under the shut face was a dry and careful humor that came out perhaps once in an hour, and a great deal of buried tenderness, gone all to salt, for want of anywhere to put it. He asked her about the 9 houses and listened to the answers, which nobody at Blackwood had done in 2 years, and it took Damaris 3 weeks to work out why he asked her, and not his own agent, and the answer, when it came, was so simple it frightened her. He asked her because she was the only person who came back and told him things he had not wanted to hear. They talked of the schoolroom, and of Nye, and of Lady Sidney's eyes, and of nothing at all. Once he told her that the shepherdess clock on the stairs had been his mother's, and that he had been meaning for 2 years to have it seen too, and had not been able to make himself write the letter. And Damaris said that she had wound it in April, and it was keeping perfect time. And the Duke of Blackwood stood in the dark on the bank above his ruined workings, and laughed once, briefly, like a man clearing something out of his throat. It was the first time she heard it. She thought about it a good deal afterwards. And in the 3rd week of June, on that bank, he told her what he had never told anybody. They had been quiet a long time. He said without turning his head that she must have heard by now what the county thought of him, and she said that she had, and he said, "Say it then." "Nobody ever says it." "They say you knew about the doors," Damaris said, "and let it go on because the workings were paying." "Yes," said the Duke of Blackwood, "that is what they say." He was quiet for a while. "I signed everything," he said. 3 years of it, from an office at Carlisle, without reading a page. Emlyn sent the accounts up quarterly, and I put my name at the foot of them, because he asked me to, and because reading them would have meant coming home and standing in that valley and being the Duke of Blackwood, and I did not want to be. I wanted to be a man in an office at Carlisle, with a brother who managed things. He turned the walking stick over in his hands. 9 men, he said. My name is on every page of it. I do not much care what the county thinks because the county is generous compared with the truth, and the truth is that they are wrong about how I did it, and right that I did it. Damaris stood very still, because she had heard the shape of the sentence he had not said, and she had heard it the way you hear a floorboard in an empty house. They are wrong about how. Then somebody, she said carefully, was managing things. The Duke of Blackwood did not answer that. He stood looking down at the black engine house for a while, and then he said that it was getting cold, and that Lady Sidney would want her chapter, and he walked her down the hill, and at the gate he said good night, in a voice that had shut like a door. She lay awake nearly the whole of that night, and what kept her awake was not the timber book at all. It was that he had come within 1 sentence of it, and stopped, and that a man does not stop there for himself. A man stops there for somebody else. There was only one somebody else in this, and he was 2 years in the ground under the church where she had copied out his name. Lady Sidney Ravel made the thing public in July, and she did it in the way of old women, which is to say without asking anybody at all. She sent for Damaris on a Tuesday morning and had her sit down and put out one hand across the table, and in the palm of it was a small steel seal on a black ribbon. Damaris knew what it was at once because she had been a clerk. It was not a family jewel. It was a working seal, the kind a woman of property keeps for stamping her own orders and receipts, worn thin at the edge from 30 years of use, with the Ravel mark cut in it. "You will take that," said Lady Sidney. "Your ladyship, I cannot sign for you. You can, and you will, and if any tradesman in this county objects, he may write to me, and I shall have you read him the answer." She sat back. "Now attend, because I have thought about this for a month, and I do not propose to think about it again. I have 400 a year of my own, and no children, and I am going blind. From Michaelmas, the relief to the 9 houses is paid by me, and not by the fund, and it is paid in coin, and it is paid by you." Damaris said nothing at all. "Every Friday," said Lady Sidney Ravel, at a table in the marketplace at Blackwood in the open, at 11 in the morning, where every soul in that village can watch it counted out. "You will keep the book of it yourself in your own hand, and it will be open on the table for anyone who wishes to look. There will be no tickets and no shop, and no papers folded up in a woman's apron. Coin on the table, in daylight." It was, Damaris thought afterwards, the single most violent thing anybody did to Corbin Rusk in the whole business. And it was done by a blind woman of 74 sitting in a chair, and it did not break a law or accuse a soul. She did not say that. She said, "Ma'am, he will know within the hour what this means." "Of course he will," said Lady Sidney. "That is rather the point, child. I have watched you creep about this valley since May, being careful, and I have not asked you what you were carrying, and I am not going to ask now, but you cannot build a thing in the dark forever. Somebody has to put a table in the marketplace. I am 74 and I am past being ruined, so it may as well be me." She closed Damaris's fingers over the seal. "When somebody tries to take that off you, and somebody will, you hold on." Damaris Fenn wore it on the ribbon at her waist from that morning, outside her gown where the whole valley could see it. The first Friday, 11 people came to watch and stood well back, as though the table might go off. The second Friday, Hesper Cobb came up and asked, in front of everybody, whether it was true that a body might have it in coin, and Damaris counted 8 shillings into her hand, and Hesper Cobb stood looking at it in her palm for a long moment, and then went straight across the marketplace to the coalman. By the fourth Friday there was a queue, and it was not only the 9. It was half the village, come to stand about and look at a table with a book open on it, because there had not been anything to see in Blackwood marketplace for 2 years. And on the 5th Friday, the Duke of Blackwood came down and stood at the back of the crowd, in his black coat, for about a quarter of an hour, and did not say anything to anybody, and went away again. The village talked of nothing else for a week. Mr. Orham, who had gone down with him and had stood a pace behind, said nothing whatever, being a man of 60 who had said nothing professionally for 40 years. But he thought, walking back up the hill, that his Grace had not stood in that marketplace since the burials, and that he had watched the small brown woman at the table the entire time, and that a man who has quite given up does not put his hat on and walk down a hill to look at somebody counting money in the rain. He put the thought away where he kept such things. She found out about Adeline Frayne on a wet Wednesday in the timber yard, and she found it out entirely by accident, which is how such things are always found out. She had gone up to count the woodpile again, and the rain had come on hard, and she stepped in under the open end of the sawing shed to wait it out. There were 2 people in the yard already on the other side of the stacked deals, and their voices came round the wood the way voices do in the rain, flattened and perfectly clear. Mrs. Frayne was saying that she had done what he asked, and had asked her questions, and had written to the North, and had got an answer, and that she had brought it to him first, and that she would like now to be finished with the whole business. And Mr. Rusk said, in the voice he had used on Damaris in the office, that he was sure she would. There was a silence, and then Adeline Frayne said something in a tone Damaris had never heard from her, and would not have believed she owned. She said, "You have had 2 years of me." 2 years, said Mr. Rusk, in which nobody has troubled your boy, and nobody has read your husband's hand aloud in a public room. I have the letter still, ma'am, and I keep it very safe, and I have never once threatened you with it, and I should be sorry to be understood as doing so now. Damaris stood in the sawing shed with the rain coming off the eave, and her arms full of nothing at all, and the last piece of it went into place with a small dry click, like a seal pressed into wax. Adeline Frayne was not his accomplice. Passist. Adeline Frayne was his hostage. There was a letter somewhere in Corbin Rusk's keeping in Emlyn Hesketh's own hand, and whatever was in it was bad enough that a woman had spent 2 years watching a valley be robbed and had held her tongue to keep it out of the light for her boy's sake, and for a dead, charming, careless man she had presumably loved, which meant that the Duke of Blackwood was holding a door shut on his brother from one side, and his brother's widow was holding it from the other, and Corbin Rusk stood behind them both with his hat in his hands, perfectly safe, for as long as neither of them let go. She got down the hill somehow. She had a fortnight's more work to do, and she did it in 9 days. The last Friday in August was fine and hot, and there were upwards of 60 people in Blackwood marketplace when the 2 carriages came in. Damaris was at the table, with the coin counted into piles, and the book open, and Lady Sidney's seal on its ribbon at her waist. She heard the wheels and did not look up, because a woman counting money in public does not look up. Then she heard Adeline Frayne say her name, and it was the tone rather than the word that made her put the coin down. Mrs. Frayne stood at the edge of the crowd, white to the lips with a letter in her hand, and she was not looking at Damaris at all. She was looking at the second carriage, out of which was climbing, in a good coat and a considerable temper, a heavy, red-faced man of 60, whom Damaris had last seen across a coroner's court in the county of Durham. Mr. Ephraim Tull had come 300 miles at his own charge, and was extremely pleased with himself. She had thought about this moment for 2 years and 4 months, and had thought that when it came she would run, or faint, or lie. What happened was that the marketplace went very quiet and very slow, and she noticed that Mr. Tull had grown stouter and that the fourth pile of coin was 1 shilling short, and she put the missing shilling on it before she stood up. He did it beautifully. He had been an attorney for 35 years, and he did not hurry. He said that he was sorry to interrupt so charitable a scene, and that the young person at the table was known to him, and that her name was Damaris Fenn, and that there had been an inquest in the county of Durham upon 4 men, and that the fair copies produced at it were in her hand and certified true over her signature. He took the certification out, as he said it, and it was a paper Damaris could have drawn from memory. He said that he wished to make no charges in a public street, but that his grace should perhaps know what manner of person had been given a seal and the handling of his tenant's money. And from the edge of the crowd, Audeline Frayne said, in a voice that shook, that she had made the inquiries herself, for the household's protection, and that Mr. Rusk had thought it right that the family should know. Mr. Corbin Rusk stood by the pay-office door, with his hat in his hands, and did not smile. Alaric Hesketh, Duke of Blackwood, had come down the hill, because he came down every Friday now, and had for 6 weeks, and he was standing not 8 feet away. Damaris looked at him. She saw it happen. She saw the whole of the last 2 months go out of his face and the shut door come back, and it was worse than Harrogate, and it was very much worse than the transportation statute. And she stood in a marketplace in front of 60 people and found, to her own astonishment, that she was not afraid. She had dreaded this moment for years, and she had arrived in it, and the dread was simply gone. There was nothing left in the place where it had been but the truth, and the truth at least was quick. "Every word this gentleman has said is correct," said Damaris Fenn. Her voice went out across that marketplace as level as it had gone across a dinner table at Marbrook, and she did not raise it then or afterwards. She said that she had written a false book fair because a man at her elbow told her the figures wanted tidying, and she had been 20 and had believed him. She said that 4 men died of it, and that a deputy who could not read was transported for it, and that she had sat at the back of that court and had not stood up. She said that she had £11 put by toward 100, and that she meant it to reach him from no name at all when he came home, and that she was not asking anybody's pardon, there being none to be had. Then she turned to the Duke of Blackwood and she said the rest. She said, "You are being robbed, Your Grace, and you have been robbed for 5 years, and 9 men are dead of it." And she told them. Not a suspicion. The thing itself, in figures, in daylight, in a marketplace, in the flat voice of a clerk reading out a column. 3 years of good timber bought for the deep end and charged to the deep end, and the same timber sold back off the bank as waste, at a waste price, quarter by quarter, at a lag of about 6 weeks, which is not how old Propwood behaves. Mr. Hoyle's own daybook, signed by him, the woodpile counted twice, and short both times, the doors that were charged for and were never there. And the relief since, paid in tickets at one shop, 2 and 9 pence in the 8 shillings, marked to by 9 widows. "It is in my room," she said, "in one stitched book, and it will take an afternoon to prove, and it will not want a word from me to do it. Nobody in that marketplace moved." And Mr. Corbin Rusk, who had never once smiled and did not smile now, said quietly and with enormous scorn that the young woman had been reading a stores book she could not understand, and that the waste wood had come off the bank in the autumn of the 2nd year, and not in the spring, and that any man in the trade would tell her so. It went across that marketplace like a stone through a window. Damaris did not say anything. She did not have to. Mr. Hoyle of Marlbrook was standing at the back of the crowd with his hat off, having come over for the fair, and he said, into the silence, in a voice of pure, honest bewilderment, that he had never sold nor bought so much as a lid off the Blackwood bank in the autumn of any year in his life, because he shut his yard for the autumn, and always had, and everybody knew it. Corbin Rusk had corrected a date that was in no book he was supposed to have read. The Duke of Blackwood turned his head and looked at his agent for a long moment. Then he said to Damaris, "3 words. Show me," he said. They did it in the long room at Blackwood, and it took the rest of that day and most of the night. Damaris fetched the stitched book down from under the lining of her father's ivory leaf case and laid it open on the table. And after that she said very little, because a proof built from the outside in does not need its builder to speak for it. It only needs the outside brought indoors. Mr. Orme was sent for people, and they came in their coats, with their hats in their hands, and laid their own books down beside hers, one at a time. Mr. Hoyle in his day book, Mr. Sennett with his ticket counterfoils, truculent, and then not truculent at all. The carrier who had taken the loads off the bank and could say what he carried, and where, and who paid him. Hesper Cobb came, and 8 other women, and made their marks again by candlelight in front of the Duke's own eyes, and one of them, a very old woman from the top of the village, said the only thing that night that was not a figure. She said her son had told her in the February that there was no door on the deep end, and they were working in bad air, and that she had told him not to make trouble, because a man who makes trouble in a colliery has nowhere to go. The Duke of Blackwood put his hand flat on the table when she said it, and left it there for a while. Corbin Rusk had grown grayer and quieter through the evening in his chair by the wall, and he made one last attempt at about 2 in the morning, in the same courteous voice, to explain the waste column. He got about 40 words into it. Then he stopped, because he had understood some time before anybody else in the room that he had lost it in the marketplace at 11 o'clock in the morning over the date of an autumn, and that everything since had merely been the counting. The Duke sent Orme to the estate office for Rusk's own papers, and they came up in a deed box, and it was in the bottom of the box, and it was the last thing anybody expected and the only thing that mattered. It was a letter in Emlyn Hesketh's hand, dated the 9th of February, a fortnight and 3 days before the fall. The first half of it was the thing Adeline Frayne had spent 2 years keeping out of the light, and it was as bad as she had feared. Emlyn had known about the economies. Emlyn had agreed to them. Emlyn had written down in his own hand, 18 months before, that the deep end could wait a season, and the second half of the letter was Emlyn Hesketh, at the age of 28, telling his agent that he had been down the deep end himself on the Monday, and that he had been wrong, and that the doors were to go in at once, and the timber to be got from Hoyle by the week's end, whatever it cost, and that he would write to his brother at Carlisle and tell him the whole of it himself, because it was his own doing, and he was not going to have it in an account. He had never written to Carlisle. He had been given a fortnight and 3 days, and Corbin Rusk had put the letter in the bottom of a deed box, and had not got the timber, and had let a man of 28 go down that shaft on a wet March morning, after his own men, in the belief that he had a fortnight in hand. The Duke of Blackwood read it twice. He did not say anything for a long time, and nobody in that room said anything either. Then he folded it and held it in his 2 hands and said, not to Rusk and not to anybody in the room, that his brother had been wrong for 18 months and right for 17 days, and that he had spent 2 years shutting a door on him for the 18 months. He looked up, and his face was awake and terrible. "Get out of my house tonight," he said. "You will be before the Marlbrook bench at noon, and every figure this lady has taken will go with you, and my brother's letter with it, and I will read it aloud myself in open court, or see him off the place and stay with him while he packs." Corbin Rusk went. There was, in the end, nothing else on earth for him to do. At the door he turned round once, and all the courtesy was gone out of him, and he said to Damaris that she might have kept to the baskets. "No," said Damaris Fenn, "I could not. Good night, Mr. Rusk." That left Adeline Frayne, who had sat in the corner of that room through the whole night with her letter crushed in her lap. She rose when Rusk had gone, still handsome and still upright, and made one last throw with the courage of somebody staking the last thing they have. "You will turn me out," she said. "Say it and be done." Nobody has said anything, said the Duke. You will. And where, cousin? I have 90 pounds a year and a boy of 6 and no people left who will own me. She was shaking, though her chin was up. I knew. I have known for 2 years, and I said nothing, and I let that man do as he liked, because he had Emlyn's hand in a box, and every time I looked at him he mentioned it, gently, the way he mentions everything. She turned on Damaris and her voice cracked straight across. I was protecting a dead man's name and a live voice. I was afraid. I have been afraid for 6 years. It is very tiring, and nobody in this room has the least idea how tiring it is. The Duke of Blackwood opened his mouth, and Damaris knew with complete certainty that he was about to be just, and that just would finish Adolin Frayne for good. Your Grace, she said. May I? He looked at her. He closed his mouth. He inclined his head. Damaris went and stood in front of the frightened, upright, exhausted woman who had written to the North about her, and had brought the answer to Corbin Rusk. She did not gloat. She had learned a long time ago that gloating is precisely what the other person is braced for, and she had never once in her life given anybody what they were braced for. You kept a letter out of the light to protect a boy and a dead man, she said. I kept a book out of the light to protect myself. Yours is the better reason of the two, ma'am, and I am poorly placed to condemn you for it, having sat at the back of a coroner's court in Durham with my hands in my lap, while a man who could not read was sent to New South Wales. Adolin Frayne stared at her. There is a schoolroom in this village with no roof and no master and 40 children in it doing nothing whatever, Damaris said. It wants somebody who can read and who is not afraid of a subscription list. You would be extremely good at it. You would be paid for it, properly out of the estate, and you would owe it to nobody, least of all to me. I should like that understood. Why? Said Adolin Frayne. It was not a graceful question. It was torn out of her. Because I know exactly how tiring it is, said Damaris, and because a valley that has just thrown out one thief ought not to celebrate by making a beggar. Good night, Mrs. Frayne. The Duke of Blackwood looked at his godmother's companion, across the wreckage of 2 years of his own silence, and something in his face that had been shut since the burials came quietly and painfully open. There had been no dinner at Blackwood for 3 years, and in the last week of September there was one. It was not a large one. The county came anyway, all of it, on any excuse, because the county had heard about the marketplace and the assizes in Mr. Hoyle's daybook, and had been talking of nothing else since August. Sir Odo Trant came, and Miss Amabel Trant, and Mr. Peveril Nash, considerably chastened. Mr. Orme put the cards out himself and permitted himself, in 19 years of service, 1 liberty. At the head of that table, on the Duke's right hand, he set the card of Miss Damaris Fenn, and he set no card at all at the other places until the rest had been laid, so that when the county came in it saw that arrangement first and had to walk round it. Damaris came down in a made-over grey gown, exactly the colour a room looks straight through, with Lady Sidney on her arm and the steel seal on its ribbon at her waist, and she did not understand what had been done until she was almost at the table. She stopped. 2 years and 4 months of being nobody, and a marketplace, and a coroner's court, and here at last was a laid table with her name at the top of it in front of 40 people, and she stood in the doorway with her employer on her arm and could not for a moment make her feet move. The Duke of Blackwood came the length of that room to fetch her. He did it slowly, and he did it in front of everybody, and he was perfectly aware of what he was doing. And afterwards Damaris understood that this had been the entire point of the dinner, and that the food had been incidental. He said, Miss Fenn, will you sit down? And halfway through the second course, in a room where nobody was pretending to talk about anything else, Miss Amabel Trant put a shilling on the cloth and pushed it down the table, and said with a good deal more grace than anybody expected of her, that she believed she owed it, and that she had been wrong about a great many things in June, and this was the smallest of them. Damaris picked up the shilling and looked at it. She said that she would put it in the subscription for the schoolroom roof, if Miss Trant had no objection, and that it wanted 14 pounds and had 9, and that she found she could not bear an unfinished column. Bede. It was the Duke who asked her afterwards on the bank, with the whole valley going dark below them and one light burning in the engine house where the pumps had started again in August. He did not do it well. She always maintained afterwards that he did it very badly, and he never once disputed it. He said that his godmother's seal was at her waist, and his brother's name was cleared in open court, and his valley was working, and his tenants paid in coin on a table in the marketplace, and that none of it was his doing and all of it was hers, and that he had signed his name for 3 years to things he had not read and had learned his lesson about that, and did not propose to put anything in front of her at all. He said, "I am not going to offer you a house to shelter in. You do not want one. You have 100 pounds to make up and a man coming home from New South Wales, and you will do it whatever I say, and you would do it if I never spoke to you again." He said, "That is exactly why I am asking." He said, "I would like to be looked at for the rest of my life by the only person in England who has never once been afraid of me, and who told me the number of my own dead to my face over a plate of fish in front of 30 people before she knew a single thing about me, except that I was the man everybody in that room had already convicted." He said, "Marry me because you choose it, or do not, and stay and run this valley, which you have been running since May, and I will never trouble you with it again. It is entirely yours to say. Everything from here is yours to say." Damaris Fenn stood on the bank above the Blackwood workings and thought about a girl of 20 in a cold office being told that a clerk who makes trouble has nowhere to go. "Alaric," she said. She had never once used his name. "That is a yes," she said, "in case His Grace requires it read aloud. I have grown extremely tired of holding my tongue." The Duke of Blackwood laughed, and it carried down the whole dark valley, and in the cottages below people looked up. Corbin Rusk went to the assizes at Durham in the March and was convicted upon the timber, and upon the relief, and upon the suppression of the letter, and was transported for the term of his natural life. The one thing the indictment could not reach was the 9 men, there being no name in law for what he had done to them, and the Duke of Blackwood said so aloud on the courthouse steps in a voice that carried, and said it again in writing afterwards. Damaris found the whole of it gave her no satisfaction whatever, only the sober flatness of a column that adds up at last. What he had taken out of the fund was reckoned to the last penny and paid back to the 9 houses, and where nothing was found on him, the Duke paid it out of his own pocket and said he had it cheap. The deep end was timbered and doored and opened in the November, and the engine house smoked again. The schoolroom got its roof, and Adeline Frayne got the school, and made a formidable job of it, and was not softened all at once, because a woman does not unlearn 6 years of fear in a season. Hesketh went into it with the other children, which the county thought remarkable, and his mother did not. Lady Sidney Revell lost the last of her sight in the winter, and took it very badly for a month, and then took it as she took everything, and lived 4 years more, long enough to be present, blind and upright, and to inform the christening in a carrying voice that she had never in her life been wrong about anybody. And in the March, Damaris did the thing she had been putting off since August. She wrote to the coroner at Harrogate Bank and told him the whole of it over her own name, and sent the certification with it, and offered herself to whatever the law wanted. It took 11 months, and in the end, the law wanted very little, the underviewer being dead and her evidence the only reason the case was reopened at all. Tubin Ferris's conviction was quashed in the following spring, and he came home in the July. She met the coach at Marlbrook herself. She would not let anybody come with her. He was a small, grey man of 50 who looked 70. She gave him the 100 pounds and the paper that cleared him, and said what she had come to say, which was short, and she did not soften it or ask him for anything. Tobin Ferris heard her out. He took the money, having 6 people to keep and being no fool, and said that he was obliged to her for the paper. And then he put his hands in his pockets, and he said not unkindly that he thought he would not shake her hand, if it was all the same, and he picked up his box and went to find the Blackwood carrier. Damaris stood in the inn yard at Malbrook for some time. She never told anybody what he said. She had it for the rest of her life, and she thought it was the fairest thing anybody had ever done to her, and she never once wished it otherwise. Some things are paid and not forgiven, and a person who has been on the other side of a fair book knows the difference. She went home and ran the valley for 40 years. There is a story they still tell about the Duchess of Blackwood, and it is not about the marketplace or the assizes. It is about a dinner in the 5th year, when a girl of 19 came as companion to somebody's aunt and was put at the bottom of the table where the paid women go, and the Duchess of Blackwood rose in front of 40 people and walked the whole length of her own dining room and asked whether the young lady would not rather sit by her. She had come south to be nobody, and she had been extremely good at it. And she had learned, standing at a table in a wet marketplace, with the whole of her life in her hands, the one thing she had spent all those years arranging never to find out. That being seen is only dangerous when nobody is looking at you kindly. That the safety she had built was not safety at all, but a very small, very tidy, very quiet room, and that she had been the only person in it